hooking APIs, and then I'm moving even lower layer to persistence where you probably won't see me anymore. And like Joey said, last few knowledge, you generally don't see persistence engineer because we are not, customer-facing features. We enable our platform to be able to persist data, read data. So our jobs is actually, if we do our job good, you will never hear about us. But actually, things happen. So, most of the time you'll see us in the, incidents, escalations, or if you happen to have, performance issues, or in this case, data loss happens. So yeah, you'll hear us here and there, but that's what, why we're talking about here.
All right, so that's us. Let's start talking about stuff. You guys did not come here to hear about Jennifer and I. Expectation for today. I hope that everyone can leave basically with a better understanding of what we're doing around trying to make it easier to recover data. Learn some of the ways that we're using some new tools, that we have been using some new tools internally, but I guess most importantly to know what's going to be possible in London and going forward for you to recover your own data. So at the risk of violating a patent that Microsoft holds, this is like a recycle bin, basically. So we want to be able to say, it's okay for someone to accidentally delete something. It's okay for someone to delete something and have that have side effects you don't know about. It's not okay that it takes days in some cases to get that stuff back. And I'm sure that there's at least a couple people in the room who have had to deal with working with support to recover some data that was erroneously deleted as a result of a defect, any of that stuff. So we're trying to fix that. Okay. So a little history. Upgrades can break things. So big major releases, big drops, that's sort of out of scope. We're not really talking about that. We know if you jump from Kingston to London, you're going to have a lot of new stuff. You might have to adjust some things that you've configured. What we're talking about here is like patches and hot fixes. Most notably, we as a company ideologically are now pushing security patches to people a little more aggressively than we had historically. And there's nothing worse than having an upgrade kind of forced upon you and being told it's just a simple security patch and then having something go horribly, horribly wrong. So in Helsinki, we actually introduced an internal patch rollback tool, which is only visible to internal support users, but it gave us the ability to roll back a patch upgrade, so an in-family upgrade. So if we did have a forced security patch that we pushed on you, and something did go wrong that you don't want to fix forward from, we have a mechanism to just one click, roll it back, revert all the database changes, revert the Java changes, the code, basically going from, say, Kingston patch 1 to Kingston patch 0.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Joey said, the benefit of that, though, you don't lose your user data, because during the time, the instance still up, right? Our upgrade is actually upgrading hot. So your user base still up, your transaction still going. So your users still inputting incidents, inputting problems, inputting change, and you may have a workflow going on. So when we roll back, we actually roll back what's being introduced during upgrade, not really deleting what user has been done. So it's actually pretty nice instead of the restore rollback. So if we happen to have to restore, if we do that route, then you pretty much lose everything since that point in time.
So the way that we've had to do this, so you have the upgrade stuff, and that's sort of just the context for the technology that we have for tracking changes in a sort of transaction-specific way. So we have, a service desk that's open, that's taking calls, it's creating incidents, it's updating incidents, and discoveries running and updating CIs. And we also happen to have some thread that's just ripping through the database, updating script includes and updating business rules and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And we want to be able to just selectively roll back all that stuff without saying, well, let's roll back everything to a point in time and lose everything the service desk has done for however many hours it's been. So that's all good for patch upgrades and hot fixes, but we still have the issue of all the other stuff. So there's the concept of cascade delete, which I'm sure everyone at some point had a case where you say, why is this thing missing? Why is this thing deleted? Why is this reference cleared? And then there's some, we'll call them features with glide record that have caused other mistaken deletes, and we'll kind of go over that a little bit. And currently, historically, before London, the only mechanism we've had is for support to, which they've gotten really good at, by the way, is to take a backup, create a brand new instance as the source of truth, figure out what data is missing, crawl through manually what the references are that you know to have been cleared by reverse engineering what the cascade delete code does, and then hoping that you can push everything over and move forward. It's all this big manual process. Support's doing a couple of them a day, maybe even more. So they're super good at it, but it's not something that we should have to deal with. So kind of what we're, I have the thing. It's kind of what we're doing. So we kind of briefly touched on why we don't want to use backup or point-in-time recovery. Yeah, I've said everything on this slide already. I got excited. I'm sorry. Am I missing anything?
No, I think, yeah, pretty much. I think most of the cases for us, and currently we're still doing that too. So it's not, even though we do introduce this automation that helps our people and helps you guys too, if there's any accidents happening, but in cases where there's other damages happen, we may or may not be able to use this tool. We still have the current process where we identify where the data loss starts and we create a backup instance, a non-production instance that goes back to that point in time. And those cases, we still have to go through manual resolution. And a lot of times, if the data is already moving forward, because if you accidentally delete and your CMDB is cleared, or not using CMDB as example, as an incident, for example, then if your incident is still moving forward, your user is still creating and updating, and if you accidentally delete a bunch of other stuff, when we manually bring it back, we can't easily to say let's overwrite whichever, because you can damage your new data. So that process is still manual. So hopefully this can help quite a bit, but in cases we might still have to go back to the manual resolution, but that can take days to recover.
Yep. So first scenario that we're kind of trying to resolve is just cascade delete. So you can have a perfectly innocuous user go to some record that they have access to delete, think that it's okay to delete it, click the delete button. It even gives you a pop-up saying, this might delete this other stuff too, which is notably not totally complete. And
everyone kind of knows what cascade delete is, right? Or
everyone's not, yeah.
Most people.
I'm going into excruciating detail, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's the scenario, is cascade delete. And it can be hierarchical, right? You delete a record, which deletes a record, and deleting that record will also have its cascade, but there's also things like business rules, there's things like script engines, whatever underlying code the application developers who wrote the application you're in happen to have written, which may have gone wrong, all things that are triggered by deleting a record using glide record or through the UI, basically. There's a lot of side effects even beyond cascade delete that can have related changes. Yeah, and so before we'd have to crawl sysaudit delete, try to find the records that we can recover. Sysaudit delete was cool to find things like if you know the exact record you want, but it doesn't necessarily give you the business rule that deleting that record, what it affected, and trying to query sysaudit between some time range to figure out which reference fields were cleared and what their previous values were and whether or not someone else manually corrected it. It's just a big pain. This is sort of the first scenario we're trying to resolve. Second one's background scripts. So I mentioned the glide record feature that frankly I'm kind of embarrassed to talk about, but there's the case where if you say glide record, add query, some column name that's spelled wrong, something, it's just ignored. So if that was your only query condition, a thing that you thought was, find me the CMDB with this asset tag, except I spelled tag TG, and you run delete multiple, you've just deleted your entire CMDB table. And that can be surprising. For what it's worth, we have a property in place to make that invalid query condition return no rows, but it's not on by default. So on a side note, that's a property that is probably a smart thing to activate, to say, if I pass you something that's spelled wrong and you don't know what it is, just tell me I'm stupid and don't give me any results and save me from myself. But the other sort of thing we're trying to resolve is not. What is the reason not to have that property default on? That's a super good question, and it's one that we bring up every release. Honestly, there are things that would break. There's a lot of stuff, even like out-of-box applications that not necessarily were designed to rely on that, but when we change it, things break because columns that don't actually exist are just kind of being ignored until some other plugin gets activated. It's just sort of bad development practice that we have to deal with.
So you might have to be careful when you activate it, right? Because suddenly, used to be you relied on that to ignore certain conditions in your query. That's irrelevant, and that keeps your instance running, a certain business rule running or workflow running. But now you turn that back on, the workflow may be broken, but that actually gives you a chance to go down to actually find out, why is that query has no effect.
If you turn it on, it's going to break out of the box code?
Potentially. That's why we haven't turned it on by default.
So how can we identify those?
That's a very good question. Honestly.
Second of all, if you identify out of box code, we shouldn't be customizing the codes. This should be back to the product development fix.
Yes.
Definitely, yeah. So
Yes.
the plan is, at some point, we as a company are going to pull the trigger and say, this is changing default behavior.
Yeah.
And we just need to mitigate all the stuff that we know to exist and have some process for customers who also get affected by things that maybe aren't exactly out of box or that have been slightly modified. It's sort of similar to like when we introduced the notion that we removed packages calls way back when and required things to be marked as scriptable. It's a huge undertaking because we can look through our code base and say, well, here are all the packages calls that we know we use, but people have been using these for years, and we have to. It doesn't even seem like it was enough to just do like static analysis of JavaScript that we see in customer instances. We had to actually track API calls by slamming stuff into our server-side JavaScript evaluator to actually see like what people were calling and have a big list of things that we go through and say, okay, well, what out of this are we going to make scriptable? And what things are we going to just accept are going to break because we shouldn't be allowing them? So it's going to be kind of something like that. And we've started phase 1 for the invalid query thing. So the default behavior right now is if it's in the old behavior where it ignores it, you get an error in the log with a message saying this is invalid. It still continues with the bad behavior, but we log it and we have sort of more obvious messaging.
Right.
You have a question back there, yeah?
I was going to mention, like, we turn on that property on our instance, and for the most part, we haven't really seen a whole ton of stuff, right?
Oh, great.
Is like a refresh update for all, that doesn't work. And they identified that was that property, but it's definitely saved us more than it's broken us for sure by turning that property on.
I tend to agree. In case anyone in here, he's saying he set the property and mostly everything works. So, and I would agree with your assessment that it's probably safer to just turn that thing on. We as a company, we have all these applications and plugins that we have to know exactly what they're going to be affected by, and most people don't have all those plugins active. So that's a thing to do as an aside. But if you do happen to maybe have a script that does something you didn't expect it to do, not as a result of a strange glide record bug, which is also still a possibility, we have a way for you to revert scripts, and that's kind of exciting. I keep forgetting I have the thing. I'm like looking at Jennifer. Okay, so
You're looking at me to clicking. But
while Jennifer is switching to demo mode and remembering the Windows keyboard shortcut.
Thank you, Joe.
There you go. Yeah.
So can you revert back even if it's not in the sys audit table, like not everything is being audited?
Good question.
We'll go over that. So I'll answer it though while Jennifer's kind of logging in. No. Oh, just log out. So can you recover things that aren't audited? The short answer is no. If you have something that's configured to not audit, the idea is that you don't want to track changes around it. Even more specifically, if you have something that's configured to not audit delete, which is a specification above and beyond just whether or not it's audited, we're not going to do anything with it. I'll go over the details after the demo. So basically, we're going to run through. Oh, you're ready. You're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm doing it.
Okay. So this is a user table. So Jennifer's just going to run through opening a user. Maybe we'll look at that user and see they have some group memberships. They have this delegate record. So those are like child records. The other related list there for change requests and incidents are reference fields. So this user is assigned to a change request. So we can see them, test 5. And they also have an incident where they're the caller. There they are. And let's say we want to delete that guy or girl or person.
Like this. Ready?
I'm ready, yeah.
All right.
So hang
I'm
on.
nervous about deleting any record, actually.
Yeah,
Because we're in persistence, and we get,
So
hesitate.
And let's pause when the pop-up thing comes up. So there's this pop-up message where we actually have some good logic that we added a number of releases ago that actually endeavors to tell you, well, I know you were just deleting this one user, but maybe you care about this other stuff too. And it gives you these 3 things, and those are the immediate descendants of the sysuser, this actual sysuser record that actually have references that we know are going to be cleared. So it's good. We're showing you that. But you'll notice that we don't actually show you the references, which are going to get cleared. So the change requests and the incident that have a reference to this user are going to still persist. But no assignment, no caller, you're going to lose that, which is a really common, it's usually the biggest problem when you have someone that has a cascade delete problem that goes through. So say you had some CI record that was actually some placeholder that is stored in references all over the place. Somebody accidentally deletes it because they think it's noise. Now you lose all your references and you have to crawl sysaudit to find them. So we can delete this guy. And so behind the scenes, where cascade delete is running, business rules are running, script engines are running. And as you'd expect, the user's deleted, we move on with our lives, everything's good. Except if we
Reload.
So assign to's gone, and I'm sure you can predict what's going to happen here. And we have no caller, and that's also a mandatory field. What the heck? How am I supposed to deal with this? So now the next poor soul that comes along and just decides to open that incident also can't add a comment unless they divine some person to set as the caller, which isn't super cool. So let's go to the new rollback and recovery application. So 3 new menu items here. Rollback context that's that stuff that goes back to Helsinki. So that's going to be an entry basically for all the different things that we record rollback contexts for. So I mentioned patch upgrades and hotfixes are going to have rollback contexts. So we'll also have rollback contexts for plugin activations. And the other thing that you're probably familiar with is ATF, automated test frameworks. So when ATFs run, they're using rollback under the hood to record the changes that running a test makes. And this is what the same technology they're using to roll back those changes. So Jennifer went to delete recovery, the second entry there. And you can see there's an entry. So in this case, it's not exactly easy to read here because of the nature of how our deletes work, but you can see that the initiating transaction is just XML HTTP.do, which is AJAX. So because we have that pop-up after the delete form, it actually registers as just like an AJAX request. You had a question real quick?
I heard you say, I think you said we will be able to roll back plugin activations. Is that in this, or is that something that's coming in the future?
We will be able to roll back plugin activations. So going back to Helsinki, being able to roll back a plugin was sort of an opt-in thing for the person who owned the plugin. They could change the metadata on the plugin to say, this supports rollback. There's a slide later that gives the reasons why, in some cases, rollback doesn't work. There's some operations that we just can't roll back. So we left it to the plugin authors to decide whether or not they wanted to support it. And being an opt-in thing, people don't take the effort to do it. So I believe in London. If it's not London, it'll be Madrid. Plugin activations are recorded by default. So you can roll back a plugin activation, but it's not an uninstall. It's a transactional rollback. So if you have a plugin that's active and you go and you upgrade that plugin, the activation and the upgrade are two separate events. So you can roll back the upgrade, but it's only going to roll back the stuff that it did, if that makes sense. So we still don't really have a plugin uninstallation, but the expected use case for a plugin would be, I activate this thing, I decide against it, I roll it back. And that would work. And that's, I believe, by default in London. And when we go over the slide of limitations, you'll see like where it might not actually work.
So there's no way to deactivate the plugin?
There's no way to deactivate a plugin. Yeah, you're in. So this is a new delete recovery form. So in addition to saying like who it was, it gives you a nice little like graph of what records were deleted, which were updated, a little related list, so you can actually see. So these are all the other records that were deleted, notification message stuff, some modifications. But the magic happens in that related link for rollback. So I guess we're ready to roll it back, right?
All right.
So here's how we roll back a thing.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
We type yes, and then we click OK. And we're executing the rollback, and we're done. So now if we go back to the change and refresh that, I'm still impressed that Jennifer uses the right-click reload. It works. And if we go to the incident, our caller.
Click on that.
I'm just giving you credit. So yeah, and it's back. And like,
Make sure the user record's back.
not exactly exciting. It's like, yeah, we deleted it and it was gone, and now we restored it and it's back. But like, it's kind of cool. Yeah, what's up?
Good
You're
question.
talking about collisions, it sounds like. You're saying if someone were to manually go in and make a change, what happens when you roll back? We go over that in a later slide, but the quick answer is we endeavor to do the same thing that an upgrade does. And that means that a more recent change and a change made by a customer, as opposed to a change made by the system, wins. There's some more rules around how we might you might have changed the state field and we're updating the assignment group, so like the mod count on the record's higher, but we might be able to roll back the field that wasn't changed. Anyway, I'll go over it. So that's sort of like the cascade delete thing. And the next thing we want to show you is the script execution stuff. So Jennifer is going to open up scripts background, and we're going to write a little script that just is going to delete a single problem record, right?
Yes.
So this is super easy. Jennifer writes a lot of glide record scripts, so she'll probably be fine.
GR is fine.
Well, GR is not fine, but I'll accept it. So while she's doing that, there's this new record for rollback checkbox. So that's actually been there since Helsinki, but only for Mate users. So only ServiceNow employees have been able to see it. But now in London, it'll be accessible to anyone who can access scripts background, so admin or security admin, depending on your configuration. But basically, box is there. It's checked by default. If it's checked, execution of that script is going to be recorded, so you can roll it back later. Is that in, yes, it is in fixed scripts as well. Yeah, in the sys script fix table, yeah, there's actually a field on, I'm glad you asked that because I didn't mention that in the slide. And the sys script fix table is the thing that you can actually move with update sets. There's a field on the fix script record that's recorded for rollback. If you set that to true, it'll record. So yeah, this seems good. Delete the one where the number is that. So yeah, let's just run it. We don't need to test that, right? Oh,
Oops, I clicked it.
oh, you forgot.
Oh, shoot.
You spelled number wrong. Oh, crap. So this is actually relevant because this is what we were just talking about, the invalid query thing. So you get this stack trace and a big message telling you this is not a real field, but the behavior is still the old behavior. And we deleted, you can see 20 problems instead of the expected one. So the one thing cool this is new, this whole section at the top, the script execution history and the table and row count stuff. So if you run a script in scripts background with rollback recording, after the script runs, we're gonna display like the top 3 or 4 by row count table operations. So in this case, you immediately see that you deleted 20 rows from the problem table, so it should be really obvious that you did more than you expected. If you run more complicated scripts that are inserting and updating and deleting things, we'll have like the first 3 or 4 or whatever, and they all end up with a link to this record. So this is the script execution history record, there's also an entry under that nav, that new application for script execution history. So this is the one for our execution. So irrespective of the rollback, even if you don't record for rollback, we're going to start recording these records for recent script executions, because you get, here's the script you ran, here's how long it took, there's the node it ran on, and the result, some stats, really cool stuff. When you record this particular execution for rollback, you get this affected record summary tab, which gives you the same kind of bar chart showing you what was deleted or what was affected. In this case, we just deleted 20 problem records. And
Do you want to actually check out the problem
yes,
records?
yeah.
All right.
Question. So you have this property enabled to log only this invalid query, or also suppress execution if the query is...
The configuration on this instance is the default, where invalid queries just log, but continue with the old behavior of ignoring just that condition.
So can you show us what will happen to enable this property? Or
I don't, the property is,
tell us what will happen to it.
it would just return no rows. So if I set the property to say invalid query returns no rows to true, which is the property that makes that behave the way you'd expect it, it just wouldn't return anything. It would say, I don't know what the number field is. You could write a query that said gr.delete, gr.next, next, whatever, just wouldn't find any result sets. Yeah.
If you set that property to true, it's still logged.
It does still log if you set that property to true. It also just behaves like a human would expect it to behave. Yeah. So Jennifer's shown, we blew away our problem table, which would have been what would have happened had we run that seemingly innocuous query to clean up one problem number, which turned out to not be so innocuous. So we can go click the rollback button here on this record, which will have the same, type yes, and we are going to roll it back. And that's it. And hopefully we have problems.
This one's pretty fast. Let's try it.
Bam! All good. So, yeah, it's cool, right? Like, it would be a lot more exciting if we had a script that did a bunch of stuff, but you get the gist.
I think we delete multiple there, but typically in that case, we just call it delete, single delete. Right? Because querying...
Calling delete multiple on a table that, basically most tables...
Query for a single number on the problem. So there's only one record for that. Right?
Yeah, or I can use a different one that says
Exactly.
actually a state is,
Okay, got it.
work in progress. And I do want to delete multiple and a misspelled state too,
Okay.
Yeah, that
So-
would be the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a better example. Yes, thank you.
So let's get through the next 2 slides that kind of tell where this is going to work, kind of how it works under the hood, and what the limitations are, and then we'll see if there's still any questions after that.
Stand.
Yeah, you want to extend and you want to do slideshow. Just go back.
Go back.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so
Why is not?
what's notable here too with the delete recovery stuff, so you have recording scripts and you have recording deletes. So they both use the same fundamental technology under the hood, but they have 2 kind of different trigger points. So the script one is the easy one. The box is checked, we record the script. If you hadn't had checked the box and you just ran a script that deleted records, that delete itself is still going to trigger the delete recovery stuff, the recycle bin stuff. Basically, any glide record delete, which includes any delete through the UI, any interactive delete, is going to record for rollback so long as the table you're deleting from would have otherwise recorded for sysaudit delete. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah,
Even if you use set workflow false?
Even if you use set workflow false, yes, this is at a lower level. In fact, there's no way to turn this off transactionally. You can turn off delete recovery for a particular table by saying you don't want that table to be audited for delete, and you can turn off the delete recovery feature entirely in which case it'll revert to the old behavior where you have sysaudit delete, where it just captures the payload and no related changes. But yeah, set workflow, we don't care. And if I'm being honest, and safe harbor statement, this might not happen, but there will probably at some point be some way to transactionally skip delete recovery for whatever reason, but currently there isn't. So that means set workflow falls, for those that don't know, it would skip business rules. I think it still cascades. It'll skip script engines, but it's not going to skip some Java code that some developer wrote that runs in a DB listener, which is really low level stuff that you guys don't even have access to. So yeah, like I mentioned, the no audit delete attribute in that 5th bullet point down is how you'd opt out a table. And and notably, we only do this for data. This doesn't happen for metadata. Metadata being anything that literally extends the sys metadata table, which is basically anything that's recorded in an update set. So that all has its own update versioning stuff. We don't want to step on that. That's all its own thing. We're not affecting that at all. This is just data, tasks, CMDB, sysuser, whatever your custom table is, all that stuff. And there's only one recovery record, which is the record that we drove the rollback from that had the bar chart. So if you have one transaction that executes multiple deletes, so say instead of doing gr.delete multiple, we did while gr.next, gr.delete, gr.delete, gr.delete. Each one of those is going to enter a rollback context. It's just going to append to the existing context for your transaction. So looking through that delete recovery table, you'll have at most one entry per transaction.
So kind of advanced for you already.
Oh yeah, no, good. Okay. So rollback internals, it's thread-based. So while that script is running, we're recording what that script is doing. But we're not recording what the help desk is doing in parallel on other threads or on other nodes. We're not recording scheduled activity. So you can roll back just that one thread. It's deepest layer of the platform, meaning it's below what set workflow can skip. So there's some detail here around what we do for different operations, but suffice it to say we record as lightweight as possible. We add overhead to deletes, and the overhead is all around figuring out whether or not there's something that's about to be deleted and storing it off to the side before it actually gets deleted or updated or inserted. And there's some overhead in doing that because it's adding database activity.
Yeah.
Is there a way to disable this if you have two massive deletes? Because they're already really slow.
There is a way to delete it, to disable it, yeah. And that's the feature flag, which turns it off entirely, which is just a property, or opting out the table by saying no audit delete.
Another thing that's a thread-based, because you can also think of that is the transaction-based. Each HTTP transaction, you click on delete on UI action, that's executed by a single thread. It's a single-threaded, so we actually basically listen on when the thread starts to delete and then until that whole transaction finish. So the delete transaction actually finished. So.
Yeah. So, and I didn't mention expiration. That's super important. I think it's on another slide, but I'll say it now.
Before.
Expiration. So this delete recovery stuff, there can be a lot of data, and we don't want to just have a bunch of data sitting in your database. So it expires after 7 days, and that's just a table cleaner record. So in the sys auto flush table. So if you wanted to configure it to expire sooner on a subprod or expire later on a prod or something, it's all configurable by just changing the table cleaner record. You don't really have access to the data that is recorded, so we can give you high-level sequence data saying here are the records that were either inserted, updated, or deleted, and here's sort of where it happened in the sequence of the transaction. But being that it's such a low-level implement, that stuff's not exactly visible yet. What else did we want to say? We were on collisions, right?
Yeah, we're on to collisions. So I think there's a question earlier. Yes.
The question about if you have scheduled deletions and they're going to take a while anyway, is it possible to, in either the fixed script or the background script, to tell it to exclude itself from the deletion record? It's almost like how you can say don't run workflows, can you say it in there as well if you really want to be daring?
So the question is about whether or not we can, for scheduled delete, if we want to be able to say, I want to turn this off, right, for this thing that I'm going to schedule to run. And right now it's kind of an all or nothing thing. There's no way to transactionally say, I don't want you to, when I run deletes, to record. It's sort of like a recycle bin is the goal. It's like you ran a delete, and it's going to just go to this recycle bin in case you need it. But you can probably expect potentially in a future release to have some mechanism to do that.
And just a quick follow-up, do you have any rough estimations of how much longer it takes on certain?
Yes, so the overhead. Okay, so the overhead that applies when you're running delete recovery is directly proportional to the number of potential relationships for a table, not actual relationships, which is notable. So we have a user here that has, say, only 2 or 3 records that it's related to and a couple of references, but sysuser is referenced by maybe 500 fields throughout the platform. And we, as part of the normal cascade delete process, hit every one of those because we don't know whether or not there's actually something that's going to need to be affected. So tables like sysuser, tables like CMDB that have a lot of references, have a lot of cascade relevant relationships, those are going to have a higher overhead. And in practice, we've seen that at like 25%, 30% overhead in terms of like actual wall clock time. But normal records, like even task records, as it turns out, have much fewer potential relationships than user and CMDB. The overhead's more like 10%.
Is table cleaner gets captured?
Does table cleaner get captured?
Table cleaner delete gets captured in the rollback.
No, the table cleaner delete should not.
So if you want to clean up, it's actually better to use table cleaner. Table cleaner is our infrastructure to help you clean up the data, trimming your data, and we actually use a safer API behind the scene to make sure your database doesn't have like a gap lock, for example. If you do a query delete multiple behind the scene, we actually do a delete, add the condition to it, it eventually creates a gap lock. So if your database production is big, it's better to use table cleaner.
Are text index part of the recovery, or is that something when you recover your data, all the text indexes gets regenerated again?
Our text index is part of delete recovery. So the short answer basically is anything that our persistence layer touches as part of an overall delete is going to be recorded and rolled back along with it. So text index is a second thing, a third thing to make the list complete. Those will all be recorded, yeah. I think text indexes maybe aren't as meaningful, but yeah, if
The problem I'm always facing is if we delete millions of records, and that's creating a lot of text index events. And if I have to regenerate them, that's really expensive. And it could cause the schedules to get overrun, basically.
yeah. So every time you touch a record that's text indexed, we unload a text index event. That can be expensive. I'm repeating your question, by the way. I'm not. And that can be expensive, yeah. So fortunately, rolling back changes is a lot faster than recording the changes to roll them back. So like you could see even when we deleted those 20 problems, the bar moved over pretty much instantaneously. So it should recover that stuff way quicker than it would take to regenerate them because we're just repopulating those tables. I don't know that for sure though. It's quite possible that we don't record text search table, like the actual text search data. I don't know that off the top of my head. We can look that up later if you want, yeah.
The text search might have gone through the sys events that triggers text reindexing. So we might not be in...
There might still be something there then.
Right. We may not be in the same transaction, not on the same thread, so therefore they might not be recorded.
Yeah. So let's do limitations real quick. The next slide. Oh, I keep telling, no. Oh, collisions. So collision handling, kind of touched on this briefly. The inserts are easy. If I insert a record, the rollback's just going to delete it. If I delete a record, the rollback's going to insert it back. Updates get a little bit more dicey. So we record incrementally. So basically kind of the same way that sysaudit does per field. So if you have one incident and you update, say, a change request and a state in one transaction, we'll have 2 records for that one, 2 records for that, I forget sometimes the European thing, 2 records for the state and the short description change. And when we actually go to roll it back, it's quite possible that another user had come in and corrected the state, and we might want to still roll back the short description, but not override the state. And so that's kind of what we do. We kind of override at a per field level. If the current value of the field doesn't match the value that we recorded as the previous value in our rollback recording, we just don't touch it. Metadata is a little different. Doesn't really matter to the delete recovery stuff, but this is relevant to like ATF and plugins, upgrades. It's all or nothing. So if you had a business rule that we updated, someone else manually touches it, we're not even going to roll it back at all. You have a question?
If it does skip over something, does it surface that information to you? Or?
Oh yes, we didn't show after you run a rollback. There's a rollback run list that will tell you all the stuff that we skipped. It doesn't give specific detail. It might just say we skipped it because the value was different. And we have a link to the record so you can see, but we do actually enumerate that we skipped it. Yes.
I thought you said we don't do rollback on metadata, right?
Delete recovery does not trigger if you delete metadata, but the underlying rollback code, and this might be confusing to even be mentioning this, but the underlying rollback stuff also applies to plugin activations and upgrades. And in those cases, that's where metadata becomes relevant during rollback. So this is really the last slide, and then we'll use the rest of the time for questions. But these are just limitations. There are some things that we cannot roll back just by virtue of how we make those changes being either too dangerous or too complicated currently to do. So most notably, reparenting and anything that involves a rename is basically out. So if you have some plugin that has reparenting as part of its activation, that plugin can't be rolled back. A couple of other kind of schema changes that we won't roll back. The in-family thing, I kind of touched on a couple of times. So if you have an upgrade, it has to literally have like the same prefix from the source and target war file in the upgrade history. It's got to be glide-kingston whatever to glide-kingston whatever. If those don't match, it's not going to be considered in family and it's not going to record. Otherwise, it records by default. As an admin, you don't have access to actually roll it back yourself. You still have to call support for the upgrade rollback. You can do the delete recovery rollback, but for upgrades, you still got to go through support.
And you guys know what reparenting is, right? Reparenting basically is we have a hierarchy in our tables. So task, you have incident, that's child of task in task table, and task family or CMDB family gets pretty deep, and sometimes you want to change that family structure. So reparenting is really a very restricted API because we want to making sure that people don't access them randomly, and then our internal application team has to be reviewed before they can, put the fixed scripts that actually changing the table structure, because it's pretty destructive. What we do is we actually, create a new child, and that gets to the new parent, and we start moving the records over to the new child, and later on we drop the original child.
It's basically the most dangerous API in the ServiceNow platform, in my opinion.
So yes, sometimes you lost a child or...
Yeah, you're better off dropping a table than reparenting it. That's my opinion for the day, I guess. That I probably wouldn't have shared had it not been Thursday of Knowledge at like 3:30. So that's it. There's some future things. We'd like to use this technology for other stuff. It would be nice to be able to expose potentially a scriptable API so that you could write your own custom script and say this portion I want to record, and I want to call it this, and I want to be able to programmatically roll it back. These are all things that we could possibly do. It's just a matter of knowing whether or not that's something we want to invest time into supporting, but something that we think is safe for customers to do. So we haven't actually made any commitments there, but it's kind of there. We're open. So I guess with that, we'll use whatever time remains for questions, which isn't much, just a couple of minutes, but when we run out of time, I'm happy to talk to you guys outside. You can answer some questions too there. So, any questions in the room first?
Just a quick one, because you mentioned London a couple of times. So how much of this is now and how much of this is in London? Is all of the stuff that you talked about available now?
London. Everything.
It's all available in London.
Well,
Right, all available in London, and the upgrade rollback or patch rollback is in Helsinki already.
If you run an upgrade today from Jakarta Patch 1 to Jakarta Patch 2, you can call support and have that rolled back. But the delete recovery stuff's all new.
I think
Yeah.
we got the question in the back.
There is any limitation with domain separation?
Domain separation. Yeah. We'll support it. What about it?
What would happen if I delete a domain record?
Oh, bad stuff, I'm guessing. You delete the domain record.
Domain record?
Is domain considered metadata? I don't know, that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head what would happen.
This record is referencing.
Right, because domain underneath it is a domain field is a reference type. So it may potentially go cascade delete there, but if it doesn't do cascade delete, then you only record the domain record. If it does cascade delete, I think we will capture that changes.
There is no cascade delete, but any record that have no domain reference is moved to the default domain.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what.
So yeah, we don't necessarily, we probably should test it out, but what happens is when you delete started, the whole transaction will be recorded. And so it depends on what we capture inside.
So suffice it to say too, just in general, that the way that rollback records, it's below all other business logic. So the domain separation and business rules and workflow, all that stuff sits above where we're recording. And that's by design. We want to record at the lowest possible storage level. So we don't really, the rules of domain separation don't necessarily apply to recording. So basically any database change. So there might be logic that crafts an update statement with a particular set of query conditions. Whatever we actually update is what we record. And when you roll it back, that's what's going to be rolled back. I think you had a question back there. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a maximum amount of records that are recovered one time? Is there any kind of timeout to this?
So the only constraint to rollback is, well, there's the expiration, like where after we've done recording it, it's only going to be rolled backable for like 7 days. But while we're recording, the size of your disk, I mean, we're going to continue to record changes as long as the transaction runs until it ends. So there's no limit to the number of records, there's no limit to time. It's all subject to the same transaction quotas that the transaction would otherwise have been constrained by. But other than that, it'll record. And it's adding some storage stuff. So it's an additional storage footprint, but I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, that's why we expire. That's why we expire. Quiet. Yeah.
You said that the rollback works for fixes. Will this also work for scoped applications?
Yes, does it work for scoped applications? It'll work for everything. Yeah. Yeah, it's done. Okay, so I'll stick around and I'll meet someone outside if you have any other additional questions, if you want to talk. Otherwise, thank you for coming. I hope you had a good knowledge.